Growing a business is kind of tricky right now. Supply chains are squeezed, tariffs and trade policies are dynamic, and cash flow, it's tighter than ever. You need clarity to come out on top. Without it, you risk falling behind. If only you could hop in the DeLorean and see the future, right? Thankfully, there's NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite has real-time forecasting to help you move ahead with confidence. This is your AI-powered business management suite and the #1 cloud ERP. Trusted by over 42,000 businesses, NetSuite brings accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR all under one roof. It's your single source of truth, giving you the data and control you need to move quickly. And with AI built in, you can automate the busy work and focus on strategy. NetSuite helps you see what's stuck, what it's costing you, and how to pivot fast. If I were running a business with a lot of moving parts, I'd use NetSuite for full control over everything. Tame the chaos with NetSuite. If your revenues are at least in 7 figures, download the free ebook, Navigating Global Trade, 3 Insights for Leaders at netsuite.com/SPI. That's netsuite.com/SPI. The perfect product launch. It's the goal for every brand marketer. High heat, fast sellout, and fans posting recipes like trophies. What do Sydney Sweeney's soap drop, Taylor Swift's tickets, and your next launch have in common? Well, they're not bought, they're bragged about. Fanfare turns your drop into a moment. Fanfare cues real fans, blocks bots, and builds launch experiences worth screenshotting. Want hype without the heartbreak? Get Fanfare's 5-step hype drop playbook with our proven success formula and make your next launch unforgettable at fanfare.io/playbook. Again, fanfare.io/playbook.
I'll never forget, one lady says to me one day, "Thank you so much for sharing your story, because I see myself in your story and I thought there were things that I couldn't do. And now," and she snaps her fingers and she says, "Now I'm gonna go do them." And it was in that moment I was like, oh, my story has nothing to do with me. Story is a vehicle of possibility for the listener.
Here in the show, we talk quite a bit about the power of story and storytelling, and it's something that I always recommend we get better at. And today we're going to do exactly that, because our special guest today, Shelli Varela, is a master at telling stories, but it didn't always start out that way. And in fact, her story leads us to why story is so powerful. In fact, her story includes the fact that she was in a very large city in Canada, the first female firefighter, and the ups and downs and struggles related to that, but also what she's learned since making that happen and how she's now amplifying that story and teaching others to tell story is just absolutely not just motivating and inspiring, but in my opinion, for where we're at in content today and all the noise that's out there, it's mandatory. You need to know how to tell stories just like Shelli does. And so sit back and relax. This is a great one. This is session 671 of the Smart Passive Income Podcast. You can find Shelli on Instagram as well as her website, which is storyandpotential.com. More on that later, but relax, enjoy these stories, and learn as you go. Here we go. Shelli Varela.
You're listening to the Smart Passive Income Podcast, a proud member of the Entrepreneur Podcast Network, a show that's all about working hard now so you can sit back and reap the benefits later. And now your host. He still needs to ask for help from his family to remove any spiders he sees in the house, Pat Flynn.
Running a business means legal questions are inevitable. Is this contract or agreement solid? What can I do if a client won't pay me? Am I set up properly for taxes? Well, rather than trying to navigate all of this on your own or searching endlessly online, imagine having a law firm on your side without the high hourly rates. That's exactly what Legal Shield's small business plans offer. With Legal Shield, entrepreneurs get access to real legal support, contract reviews, collection letters, guidance on business formation, and even help handling IRS audits. Members can book consultations, upload documents through the app, and work with a provider law firm that understands small business laws in your state. You also get proactive help on tax and trademark questions so you can stay ahead of legal risks. And if a client delays payment, Legal Shield can send professional collection letters to help you recover what you're owed, all for a fraction of what traditional attorneys charge. Go to LegalShield.com/SPI or call 833-570-9980 to learn more and get big business legal support without a big business budget. That's LegalShield.com/SPI. Hiring shouldn't be a hassle or a drain on your budget. Upwork is your one-stop shop to find, hire, and pay top freelance talent, saving you time and keeping costs in check all in one place. Companies at every stage turn to Upwork to get things done and find more flexibility in the way that they staff key projects and initiatives by assessing a global marketplace filled with top talent in IT, web development, AI, design, administration support, marketing, and more. And I've personally used them myself and can vouch for them. Posting a job on Upwork is easy. With no cost to join, you can register, browse freelancer profiles, get help drafting a job post, or even book a consultation. From there, you connect with freelancers that get you and can easily hire them to take your business to the next level. Upwork makes the entire process easier, simpler, and more affordable with industry-low fees. Post a job today and hire tomorrow with Upwork. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That is Upwork.com to post your job for free and connect with top talent ready to help your business grow. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com. Go there now. Shelli, welcome to the Smart Passive Income Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh my gosh, Pat, it's my absolute privilege to share with your incredible audience. So thanks for having me.
You know, I'm grateful that you're here because I have to, and I wanted to thank you publicly for this a long time ago. I don't know how many years ago. It could have been even almost a decade ago. You had sent me a book, and this wasn't a book for me. It was a book for my daughter, in fact. And it was a very well-written book, a story about a firefighter who's a woman who was going through some struggles and then, became who she was meant to become. And then I figured out that, wow, you were actually the author of that book, which means you probably have that in your history. And so let's start there. Like, how did you know you wanted to become, first of all, thank you again for that book, but second of all, like, how did you know you wanted to become a firefighter?
Oh, well, first of all, you're so welcome. I'm glad it served. I actually didn't know that I wanted to be a firefighter. My childhood found me as an extremely, I would say, deep thinking, nerdy, very isolated, lonely, and a loner type kid. And as you can imagine, a kid like that, everywhere I went, I would get bullied. And we moved, my parents moved a couple times. So we would go from school to school. And every single time I was the kid who got bullied. And I always say not all gifts come wrapped in a bow. I learned a number of things as that really shy, introverted kid who was getting their butt handed to them on the regular. I learned to develop an incredible imagination that was not only how I coped, it's how I survived. It's how I made it through the day. And I would viscerally feel what it felt like to be, in the shootout of the Canada-US hockey team or whatever it was. And I would viscerally feel what that feels like. The second thing I learned, though, was that it was not safe to be the center of attention. And so as I journeyed through life, the world started to label me an artist. I was a writer. I'm a third generation storyteller. I was into special effects makeup. And, I was just kind of that person. And so everybody, would say, oh, Shelli, the artist, or Shelli, who, paints or draws or whatever. And so as I journeyed from like middle school to the end of high school, I'm thinking like, what am I going to do with my life? And I'm anxious and I'm trying to figure out like what careers fit in the lane of artistry. And nothing really seemed to fit. And the more I tried to like fit the square peg in the round hole, the more anxious I got because it just didn't seem like that was my thing or that was my thing or that isn't something I could see myself doing as a full career. And I looked around at all of the people that I was surrounded with, and all of my friends had everything figured out. They knew the universities they would go to, the jobs they would do, how many kids they would have. And I was just a hot mess. And so because I was just trying to avoid having to look at this situation, I had a chance run in with an old friend. And it was a guy named Steve. Our moms were good buddies, and he was going through a particularly hard time in his life. So I would come to his house and I would try and keep him talking sort of as long as I could about whatever I could. And the thing that he could speak about forever was his career as a firefighter. And he's sharing these stories of like fires and rescues. And at the time, I'm 108 pounds. I'm working in a manicure salon, so I couldn't be more removed from this reality. And I'm just trying to figure out like, what am I going to do with my life? So he's sharing these stories and I'm like, dude, that's what you get to do. Like you get to save people and you get the shenanigans around the halls and you get to drive the big red truck. And I was just like, it was the first time I had felt like that. oh, that's like really cool, like really interesting to me. And the danger of labels, Pat, is this, like, I was quote unquote an artist. The world told me I was an artist. I definitely was artistic. But as long as I was Shelli the artist, I couldn't be anything else. So I'm sitting with Steve and he's sharing these incredible stories with me. And I couldn't get enough. It was the first time I'd felt that hope. And so I kept showing up at his house again and again and again. And eventually he ran out of stories. So he started teaching me stuff. And never would I have known this otherwise, that I had this natural mechanical aptitude, because I was never looking outside the label of what the world told me I was, which was an artist. And he would teach me these things and I would pick them up really quick. And I remember the day he and I were driving in his pickup truck. We were driving across Dundas. We came up to Cawthra Road and I could see myself sitting there. And there was a tractor trailer beside us. And on the rear of the tractor trailer was a dangerous goods label. And I had paid attention to everything he said. And I'm thinking to myself, I know what that means. But inside, I'm still that shy, bullied kid. So instead of telling him what I meant, I said to him, oh, hey, Steve, like, what is that? And I was fully expecting him to echo the answer that I knew to be true. And he gave me the wrong answer. And so I corrected him. And at this point, we had been hanging out for, I want to say like 5 or 6 months. Then he turns to me and he says, Shelli, why don't you just apply to be a firefighter? And I was like, dude, look at me. I'm 100. This is 30 years ago also. I'm 108 pounds. I work in a manicure salon. I'm not big enough, brave enough, smart enough, strong enough. And there's no girls in firefighting. There was no girls at the time. And this man who I had grown to, like, I just had such reverence for, looks me square in the eye, and without missing a beat, he goes, well, there's going to be a girl one day. Why wouldn't it be you? And it sucked the air out of my lungs. The thought hadn't even crossed my mind. And I said, well, that's ridiculous. Like, I don't have any knowledge or skills or experience. I work in a nail salon. And I don't know if you've ever had one of those days where you're kind of driving around and you end up at a destination and you're like, I literally don't remember getting here. And my entire day was that. But that evening, I was lying up in my bed and I remember looking up at my white stippled ceiling. And his words had been echoing and bouncing around in my brain all day long. And the words that changed my life were, why not me? And when I heard myself say them, there was something different about myself saying them. And it was like the flip of a switch. And in that moment, I didn't care what it cost me in blood, sweat, money, time, or tears. I was going to become a firefighter. So I thought, okay, well, I have none of the skills and I need hundreds of pieces of knowledge or information and physical strength. Again, I'm 108 pounds. I'm working in a nail salon. So I thought, okay, I need to learn about first aid, CPR, driving a truck, building construction, fire science, all of the things. But if I had all of that, unless I can physically do the job, none of it matters. So I thought, okay, I have my starting point. So I go to the local university that ran the firefighter physical tests. And I was a 10-kilometer a day runner. And I'm thinking, well, it's going to be hard, but it'll be fine. So I go, I pay my money. And that is not what happened. I got my butt handed to me. And I walked out of that physical feeling defeat like I'd never felt in my life, because it was the first time I'd ever felt or allowed myself to feel hope. And I realized there is absolutely no way that my 108-pound frame is ever going to be able to perform that job. So I went home and had a wicked pity party for a couple of days. I was like crying and it was a hot mess and I didn't get out of bed. But on the third day, I got like mad. And so I called the university back and I said, yeah, I'm going to need the entire stats for the physical, heights, weights, distances of everything that needs to be pushed, pulled, all of it. And I built it in my backyard. And I failed at that physical over and over and over. And it was, bloodstained hands and vomit and tears. And it was awful. But I kept showing up again and again and again. And all the while now I'm starting to educate myself. I have now my truck driving license and I'm learning all of these hundreds of things, none of which I knew at the starting point. And I battled at that physical for 1,162 days. And every single night I would go to sleep and I would practice feeling, just like that bully kid, I would practice feeling what it felt like to get that phone call. And 1,163 days later, my phone rings. And the voice on the end said, Shelli Varela, it's Deputy Chief Gary Morden. We would like to welcome you aboard as our city's first female firefighter.
Wow.
And it's interesting because
That's wild.
that phone call felt exactly like I practiced it time after time after time. And it made all the newspapers, the TV stations were there and the radio stations and the print press and everybody was there. And I didn't like being the center of attention because I remembered back to that bullied kid. What I knew for sure was it was not safe to be in the spotlight. It was always a very bad experience, but that leaves a visceral scar and reaction on your person. So whenever I was in that situation, I still had that same gasp that I'd had when I was, on the playground as a kid. But because I was in the media, everybody kept asking me about my story again and again, and I was so shy. But I'll never forget, one lady says to me one day, thank you so much for sharing your story, because I see myself in your story and I thought there were things that I couldn't do. And now, and she snaps her fingers and she says, now I'm gonna go do them. And it was in that moment, I was like, oh, my story has nothing to do with me. Story is a vehicle of possibility for the listener. And in fact, my story isn't even it's not about firefighting. It's about possibility and potential. And when I realized that, I had always been a storyteller. My grandfather was a storyteller. My dad was a storyteller. So I would always tell stories, but I never wanted to be the main character until that woman said that to me that day. And I thought, man, sharing the challenges and the struggles that I've been through, make her feel like she can do her version of that. And so I went down this rabbit hole and I started to learn about story and storytelling and how it affects your psychology and how it affects your relationship to possibility. And what happens whenever you're sharing your story, that moment when you share vulnerably, you're taking somebody from average to astounding. So when somebody hears your story, they're actually feeling their own. It's almost like it activates the mirror neurons in their minds, because everybody has that internal story. They have that dialogue that it's almost like a precognitive commitment from the time we're little kids about what we believe is possible, what we believe isn't possible for us. And all of the micro commitments and these grains of sands, as I say, that we get exposed to throughout our lives. So, for little girls, it might be, hey, Sally, give me 5 first names of a race car driver. And she will say Mike and Steve and John and Bill, but she's not going to say Sally. And it's just all of these grains of sand inform who we are, who we're not, what's possible, what's not possible for us. And it happens in our unconscious mind. So we actually stop paying attention to the fact that that's even occurring. But where it gets dangerous and where story is literally the key in the lock for your freedom and for your potential is in that moment when you feel your body say yes. It's like when you feel that excitement, like the time when I'm like, ooh, maybe I could be a firefighter. And you feel it's like your body always knows the truth. You hear something that is true for you. You're like, oh, yes. But in that nanosecond, all of those grains of sand come flooding down and you find yourself saying no to stuff you should be saying yes to. And you find yourself saying yes to stuff you should be saying no to. And so what I teach people that I coach with now is the concept of believe, belong, and become. I don't know if you've ever read Robert Cialdini's book, Influence.
Yep.
But in his book, Influence, he talks about social proof and authority and likability and reciprocity. And story hits all of those. So if you're somebody who wants to use story to inspire people, to instill hope and allow themselves to see the possibility for them, it serves that way. If you want to have yourself be seen and heard and stand out in a noisy environment. Story will create authority for you. But where story has the magic power, I believe, is in this day of social media. We are more connected, but also less connected than ever before. And we, we'll be scrolling through our phone and maybe having a bad day, maybe having a human experience where things aren't rosy and glowing and, you have your filter on and you're on vacation in Hawaii or whatever that looks like. You might be having just a regular day. But when you start scrolling through social media, you realize that everybody else is doing so much better than you are. And I remember when I was on stage at our mutual friend Stu McLaren's event, and I was sharing a story, and I'm going to share with you how reciprocity freed up about 100 women in that audience. I was sharing the story of how I was bullied. And if you're scrolling and you're feeling less than, or you're putting your best face forward, whether it be on social media or in business or in your social group, we sometimes don't always feel safe to share how we're really doing. We're programmed to say we're doing well, and that leads essentially to people suffering in silence and silos. And I shared that bullying story, but I went into far more depth of how the impact that had on me. And what happened was, when you share something first, like the law of reciprocity states that if I give you something, you're wired to want to give me something back. But if the thing that I give you is my vulnerability, and that's not gratuitous oversharing, but a time where something was really, really tough for me, you will hear my story, but you will feel your own. And I watched people in that audience not have to say the difficult, hurty thing, but instead put their hand up and say, yeah, that happened to me too, or a version of that happened to me too, because struggle is the connective tissue between human beings. But what happens is so many of our emotions move. Like, story is the vehicle for the human connection. It's why we get lit up with movies, and it's why we can show people a new way of thinking or being or provide hope. That day, I realized that so many emotions move, like anger moves and grief moves, but fear and shame and feeling unworthy, they don't move. They have to be moved. And if you don't move them, they start to calcify. But when you share your story first, it literally breaks the chrysalis and lets the light in for those people who maybe don't have the bravery to share or don't feel safe to share, but they hear you sharing vulnerably and they're like, man, me too. But here's where it gets really magical. If you share the point where you were struggling, or you had your face in the dirt, or you were just having an average, not so amazing, but also typically human life, they hear your story and they feel your own. But what happens is they now are watching what happened to you. Where did you go? How did you overcome that? Because if that's possible for you, then what is possible for me through the vehicle of hope through your story? And so that's what I like to teach people, especially, those people who have a message on their heart, something they want to share, a gift they want to share with the world. And for many people, that ends up being what they turn into a business or a calling. And in many cases, it really is just the idea of believe, belong, become. After I started sharing the story and I started seeing how my bullied kid and my little I wanted to be a firefighter story started switching so many people on, I had a friend who had delivered a TED Talk, and I thought, oh, I want to do a TED Talk. And then immediately I think, oh, I'm going to throw up, because what I'd forgotten is that I am literally terrified of public speaking, was next level terrified. And then I stopped myself again and I thought, okay, hang on a second. This person that I know so well did a TED Talk, so I know it's possible. So what is it that I'm actually afraid of? Because, your subconscious mind likes to keep you safe. So conveniently, being quote unquote afraid of public speaking is intangible. You can't touch it or tinker with it. And I decided to get under the hood of what am I actually afraid of? Because I saw the difference that my message, my little message, one little person made to so many other people in their journey, and that my message wasn't actually about me. So I get under the hood and I thought, okay, what am I actually afraid of? And what I realized is with most things, it breaks down into almost two categories, which I call roots and wings. And the roots is kind of like your practical, tactical, mechanical, I don't know how to do this part. And so for me, that looked like I had no speaker coaching. I'd never done a TED Talk before. I didn't know about voice or physicality. So I hired coaches, problem solved. And on the wings side, the wings is more of the emotional, like, how do I feel about this? What am I actually afraid of? What are the feelings underneath the fear of public speaking? And when I got to the root of that, I realized I felt unworthy. No surprise, the bullied kid on the playground. I didn't feel safe in the spotlight. Again, no surprises there. And I was terrified that I was going to embarrass myself or it wouldn't land. So I went to a therapist and I got some counseling. So I took something essentially that was intangible. I'm afraid of public speaking, broke it down into actionable roots and wings kind of steps. And I was able to get myself on the stage all by hacking my inner story, because your inner story creates your outer reality. And performing that TED Talk was one of the greatest gifts of my life, because I've received so many messages echoing just the same thing. Your story switched something on in me that allowed me to do the thing that I thought was not possible. But I don't think people realize, because it can't be overstated, how important your story is for your possibility and your potential, but also the listeners or your audience. And this was driven home to me when I was sitting at home one day. My phone rings and it's one of the fire halls. And I thought, oh, that's weird. I was off duty. So I pick up the phone and it was a guy I know on another shift. And he's like, oh, hey, Shelli, you got a minute? And I think something's wrong, because odd. And he says, listen, there's this girl at the hall right now. We were just at an accident and we were cleaning up the accident. She was a bystander, and she came over and she started asking us like all of these questions about firefighting. And so we said, well, like, why don't you come back to the hall and have a coffee, and you can ask us whatever you want. So she was there for about half an hour. And in the course of the conversation, she says to these guys, well, I have this TED Talk that I watch every day. And in fact, there's a line in the TED Talk that I've made my ringtone. And her phone rings and it's my voice. Now, I live in Canada, but I gave my talk in Santa Barbara. So just by serendipitous reasons, these guys would have no reason to think that I was the Santa Barbara TED speaker. And this girl would have no reason to think that I lived in Canada in the literal area that she was talking to these firefighters in. And the guys say to her, we know her. And she's like, you do not. And they're like, yeah, we do. Hang on a second. And they called me. This young girl was just like beside herself, like I was a celebrity or something. And she says, you don't understand, like I'll get emotional. You don't understand, because every morning I wake up and I think I can't. And I know at some point my phone is going to ring and I'm going to hear you reminding me. And that is the power of story. Because if you trace the root all the way back, I was the bullied kid who just thought it was like there was something always wrong with me. So we never really realize the power that our story is going to have to affect other people, but also affect ourselves, like rewiring that inner story. And it's like, okay, what actually is possible? And if we have that visceral, sickening feeling when our body says, oh, there's something that I so want to do, and then we immediately go into, that's not possible for me. If we pause for a hot minute, we can realize that those things can be broken down. And when we share our stories, we are literally unlocking what feels stuck and what is calcifying in other people. On the outside, it seems like we're sharing stories, but it really is the ability to be seen and to be heard and to have your message and your gifts shared with the people who absolutely need it the most.
Standing ovation. Oh my gosh. Like, thank you for sharing that. And I want to ask you questions about how you tell a story, because you tell it in such a brilliant way, obviously. Before I get to that, though, and the strategies and tactics and stuff, I just want to plus one everything you just said about the power of story. I didn't know that I myself had a story until I started telling it and started seeing the reactions from others too. Like, oftentimes we don't even realize how powerful our own stories are. And I want you to speak to those who listen to this and are obviously moved by your story, but then immediately get into those grains of sand in their lives that say, well, I don't have a good enough story to tell. Like, my story is not going to make an impact on somebody. What would you say to that person?
I would say that everybody has a story, and the most powerful stories hinge around a very simple phrase. And that phrase is, and then I realized. And then I realized. I will share another quick story about how simple the story can be. I probably will get choked up again because I've not been able to get through it yet. But back in the day, I used to watch the Oprah Winfrey Show, as we all did, I'm sure. And they used to have this segment, which I loved, called Everybody's Got a Story. And they would take a dart and they would throw it at a map of the United States, and they would go and they would look at it and see where it landed. They would drive their entire crew to that small town. And it was back in the day. So they'd go to a phone booth. They'd flip open the phone book and they would just randomly flip to a page, drop their finger, and go and tell that person's story. And this one particular day, they show up at this farm, and it's a really meager farm. And what they found was the person whose story they were going to tell was a 24-ish-year-old girl. And she lived on the farm with her mom and her dad, and they had nothing in terms of means. They were quite humble in terms of their socioeconomical position. And so, as you can imagine, the door opens and it's the Oprah Winfrey crew. And the girl says, well, I don't have a story. So they start peeling back the layers. And she shares how she's there with her mom and her dad. And she just has such reverence for her parents. And she says, they get up at the crack of dawn and they work all day. And then she recounts this particular day where her mom was out in the field and, her hands were bleeding and calloused, and she had to get to the bank for whatever reason because she had to deposit this meager check. And so this girl decides to go to the bank, and all the while she's, telling the crew, the Oprah crew, how her parents are the hardest working people and they're the first people to help out at a bake sale and, to sit at the foot of the dying or to help a neighbor. And so she goes to the bank with her mom, and her mom is going back in the fields later that day. So she's, a bit dirty, and she's standing in line, and the person behind them is wearing this beautiful suit. And she watches her mom's posture shrink, and she watches her mom's dirty hands wrapped around this meager check. And she watches her mom slump, and she sees the man behind her in a suit kind of look her up and down. And she just watches the shame on her mom's face. And she says, and then I realized that is actually what a hero looks like. And then she went on this tyrant about how beautiful her parents was and what they meant to her. But the pivotal moment in that story was just a woman standing in the bank who had come off the fields, and she was just holding a check. Because story, my definition of story is it's that snapshot in time. It's your perspective in that snapshot and what you make it mean. And it is always the meaning that drives the story. If we were constructing that story, we could have made that story mean a number of things. But what landed on that girl's heart that day is what that moment meant to her and how she could share that one moment about what is a hero and what really matters. And, it's so easy to judge someone standing in the line at a bank because they're dirty. But what you don't realize is that is the most loyal, devoted human being with the most incredible integrity. And it was just an example that she got to share something so powerful with a moment that sounded exactly like, and then I realized.
And then I realized that is a fantastic, amazing tip. And I imagine that Oprah's crew crafted that story in a beautiful way with the, the music and other things to kind of emphasize that hero's journey for her mom and whatnot, which just takes it to a whole new level and taps into other parts of our psychology. We've been on one of my newer YouTube channels really diving into storytelling and learning about it. And our recent video that was published actually goes into a story of me just collecting cards. I'm just collecting cards, and I'm trying to collect a whole set of Pokemon before the end of the event. But the meaning behind that was the community coming together to help make it happen in the end when they saw me struggling. To a point where in this video about Pokemon, I'm crying at the end because I couldn't believe people would go out of their way. And then this video becomes the top 3 trending video in all of YouTube.
It's because the truth is palpable, and when people hear it, they know it. Like, people know when you're crafting a message that you think is just going to sell something. It feels different than when you're giving your entire self. And it's almost like we're wired as human beings to know when people are going all the way there with you.
Now, I know that you have really walked the walk when it comes to you learning about storytelling. I mean, you had mentioned that you had gotten coaches and stuff because you knew how powerful this was, yet you didn't know how to do it exactly, which is a trait that I often find myself in as well. Just like, I want to do this. I know this will help a lot of people, but I don't know how. Let's go find somebody who does. And I remember meeting you at an event that Pete Vargas put on called Adventure Reach. And there, he likes to host a little contest, if you will, where speakers come up and they give their 3-4 minute story, which is a very difficult thing to do.
It is.
In such a short period of time. And I remember, Pete had asked me to judge that, and yours and a couple others were so beautifully told that like they're just hard to forget. And so the fact that you were there, honing in on your skills, getting better, putting yourself on stage, which we know is now not a natural thing for you, so that you can get better at this, just, shows how much this story helps people. And it's, again, not about you, but those who you make an impact, but also feels like it's also therapeutic for you to talk about. And maybe if you could correct me if I'm wrong, but by telling your story again and again, it perhaps reminds you about where you came from and the impact that, you can have on others at the same time by just, because sometimes we live in our own bubble or we can't read the label when we're inside the bottle and we get so busy, we forget where we came from or we forget the why. But like, does you getting on stage and being a professional speaker now, does that help remind you of all those things and just keep kind of accelerating you forward?
Absolutely. I think if anybody can speak is a storyteller, and whether you're on an actual stage or you're just sharing with your kids or with a classroom or, with somebody you meet in line at the grocery store, I think we are all storytellers. And I think when we share our story, and I don't want to keep saying vulnerably because, sometimes stories are funny or sometimes stories, have a different point, but it heals the storyteller. And when you're able to do that, you can coach people differently. You can respond to people differently because once you've, lifted up some of the stones on your own story, you have and develop this innate ability to get other people unstuck, to see, that something might be showing up as procrastination, might be fear or unworthiness. It might have the, give you the ability to have the insight to see what is the story beneath the story. Because when you do the work on your own story, it really is like rocket fuel in helping people to reach their potential. So many times we will hear a story and it's like, oh, and you almost feel that effervescent sense of hope, but not just hope for yourself. And, I'll share with you this other real quick story. I do a lot of work with girls and women, and I ended up hosting and founding this junior female firefighter boot camp. And it was 20 girls age 15 to 19. And we were just exposing them to firefighting and, from my perspective, also possibility. And I'll never forget, there was this one girl named Cassandra, and she was tinier than me. I'm 5'2". She was like small girl. And a lot of the girls were there taking selfies, and they were, cutting apart cars and hanging off buildings and putting out fires and all of the kind of that stuff. And she would always stand at the back and she'd have her hands behind her back, and she would come up at the end and she would thank the instructors, and she was so respectful. And I remember on the last day, it was a week-long program, we would have this open house and we would have the girls bring all of their parents and their families, and they would get to watch these young girls run an actual fire call. And it was so exciting. Like, it was just to watch where they are when they come in the door and they're nervous and they don't know each other, to at the end of the week, they're just ballers and they're just calling out orders, and watch them grow in that way. And this one girl, Cassandra, her mom came up to me at the end of it and she goes, thank you so much for putting this on. Like, what an incredible opportunity for these girls, and particularly for my daughter, to be able to be exposed to something like this. It's just such a shame that she won't get to, she's not going to be able to be a firefighter. And my jaw dropped. And I said, what are you talking about? And she says, well, like, she's, really small, and it would have been powerful if it was any of the girls, but that particular girl, you would have picked her out in the crowd and said, I'd have her on my crew tomorrow. And I said, have her call me. And so I gave the mom my phone number, and this young girl, she's 19 at the time, she calls me and she says, can I take you for coffee? And I said, what would I tell you? Or what would you say if I told you that your success is inevitable? That I can guarantee you 1,000% that if you want to be a firefighter, and if you're willing to get your teeth kicked in, and if you're willing to do everything I tell you, that you absolutely will become a firefighter. And she says, I'm in. So I said, okay. So I gave her some instructions, and I'm like, here's what I want you to do. Come back in a year. If you've done all of the things I've asked you to do, you're welcome to come back again. So a year later, she got in all her schooling, and she comes back and she says, okay, now what? And I said, okay, if you land an interview, you're tiny and you're a woman, and you're going to walk in the door, and while unfair, they are going to think you are not capable unless you prove you are. So now I need you to do the roughest, gruffest, most physically grueling trade you can come up with. So she flew across the country and she became a parachuting woodland volunteer firefighter. She comes back a year later and she says, I landed an interview. So I coach her on the interview, and she ends up getting the job 2 years later. And the point of that story is, if you trace the route back, because her story also is not about firefighting, if you trace the route all the way back, there is that moment where she didn't believe she could. And I assured her that if she wanted this, she could absolutely, unequivocally have it. And it was that switch. It was that belief. And if you can take somebody through the process of believe, belong, become, because I told her, you and anybody else can become anything that you're currently not, if you believe you will. It's kind of like if you were to say to somebody, hey, listen, if I would guarantee you that in 3 years you will have $5,000 or $5 million rather, but you have to do these, 15 grueling, ridiculously hard things, but I will guarantee you $5 million at the end of it, you would act as if your success is inevitable. But it's because you're able to switch on that belief. And when you can get underneath the story, like, she didn't believe it was possible for her. But as soon as we were able to switch that on, it's almost like finding that first domino, and then all of the other dominoes fall. And she did get her teeth kicked in, and she did, work super hard, and it wasn't easy. But receiving her phone call, and she left me a voice message, and she was in tears, and she was like, Shelli, we did it. We did it. And I'm like, I told you, like, there's so much magic and potential in people. And if we can just pour gasoline on that fire, people would be shocked at what is possible for them.
I'm imagining her telling her story, and the point at which she goes, and then I realized, which was when she had that first phone call with you. And wow.
That's what we do for our clients, like, when we're able to share something that allows themselves to see themselves in our story, and they're like, I'm with Pat, or I'm with Shelli, like, I will follow him anywhere. And that is a responsibility. And it's also such a huge gift, because when you can build truth in somebody, you can allow them to trust themselves. And that's actually what's creating the transformation for them, is just that belief Like I know, like I know, like I know it.
Well, thank you so much, Shelli, for this. This was a beautiful, I was just sitting here listening, and I'm sure the audience was as well. So wherever you're at, I hope you enjoyed this. And Shelli and her work is available in many different places. You can go check out her TED Talk, obviously, and we'll link to all these things in the show notes as well. I know you have the children's book. Have you written any other books since we've chatted? And because now you're a coach and have gained this superpower of storytelling, are you an author in that sense as well?
I'm actually working on my book right now. Working title is Why Not Me?
Perfect. And then you said you also coach. Where might people go to learn more about that from you?
Yeah, so I coach people on delivering an unforgettable message, but also I coach the human who has to be in the spotlight to deliver that message. People can DM me on Instagram. It's Shelli Varela. I'm at shellivarela.com, but for all these smart passive income listeners, I have some really juicy tidbit training at storyandpotential.com.
Storyandpotential.com. And you said Instagram for a DM if they want to reach out to you?
Yep. Anybody's welcome to send me a DM if they want to hop on a call, or if they have any questions about their story or their potential and possibility, and how to access the underbelly of that is waiting to be discovered.
And again, that's Shelli, SHELLIVARELA on Instagram, and you can connect with her there. Shelli, thank you so much for this. It was such a pleasure to catch up with you again. I know it's been a while for the two of us. We need to just have a coffee together and catch up on both sides. But you have unlocked an incredible power to influence in such a positive way the entire world, and especially little girls out there. And so, my daughter and my family and I were very struck by your book and your writing there. And I'm glad to see that you're amplifying that message even more in different kinds of ways to different kinds of people. So thank you so much.
Thank you, buddy. So appreciate you, my sweet friend.
All right. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Shelli. Isn't she just amazing? And her storytelling is beautiful. And like I said, I've seen her progress over time. I was once, like I said, judging a speak off, if you will. And she was one of the contestants and one of the ones that really stood out to me. And to see now where she's gone several years later and just the impact she's making is just absolutely incredible. So I'm very grateful for her. Again, storyandpotential.com is where you can go to check out some of the goodies that she just promised for us, as well as Shelli Varela on Instagram. And I highly recommend you check her out and learn from her, because she's got it. And we'll put all the links in the show notes and such, the children's book and her TED Talk and whatnot. And I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. I just sat there and listened. I didn't even have to ask questions because she's just a master. So, Shelli, thank you so much. I appreciate you, and looking forward to seeing you on bigger and more stages, even though I know it scares you a little bit. And I can definitely connect with you on that level for sure, because it's something that I was definitely afraid of as well, and still am, but still continue to do, because I know that's how it's going to impact the most people. And I hope, and I just want to encourage all of you who are listening to do just the same. Your story matters no matter how big and small it might be, because there are people in this world who want to hear it from you. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I look forward to serving you the next episode of the Smart Passive Income Podcast. I'll probably tell a story this Friday, actually. So make sure to follow through and hit that subscribe button, because on Fridays, it's usually a solo episode with me, and I tell a story and some lessons based on often the interviews that were had in the same week. And so I got a story to share with you. I already know which story I'm going to share with you. And so hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Cheers, take care, and as always, Team Flynn for the win. Peace. Thank you so much for listening to the Smart Passive Income Podcast at smartpassiveincome.com. I'm your host, Pat Flynn. Sound editing by Duncan Brown. Our senior producer is David Grabowski, and our executive producer is Matt Gartland. The Smart Passive Income Podcast is a production of SPI Media and a proud member of the Entrepreneur Podcast Network. Catch you next week. I get it. You want to grow your business, but selling at scale feels overwhelming. You're drowning in complicated funnels, creating different lead magnets, or constantly posting on social media. And that gets exhausting fast, especially when you're trying to sell to hundreds or thousands of people. But what if you could sell at scale with a simple, powerful quiz? A score app quiz or assessment asks your audience key questions and gives them instant personalized results based on their answers. Your audience gets to know where they are now and shows them the steps they need to hit their goals. You can set up a quiz in minutes using Score App's templates and have a powerful lead magnet that'll do the selling for you. The best part is your audience actually wants to take this quiz, and you build huge amounts of trust before you even make a single offer. No hard sales, no chasing leads, just value at scale. Get 50% off the first 3 months using the discount code SPI. Just head to scoreapp.com/SPI. Again, that's scoreapp.com/SPI. Have you dreamt about being your own boss, but still haven't made the first steps to making that dream a reality? Well, I get that. Starting a business can feel super overwhelming with legal forms, paperwork, finances. It's a lot. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about Taylor Brands. Taylor is a complete business builder designed to make launching your business simple and stress-free. You can register your LLC in just minutes, keeping your personal assets and the business assets separate from day one. From there, you get access to everything you need to get off the ground. Legal documents, licenses and permits, invoicing and bookkeeping tools, and even a 100-day business coaching program, all designed to help you hit the ground running. You'll also get a free, personalized business plan, branding tools, and so much more. And of course, listeners of this show get an exclusive 35% discount to get started. All you have to do is head to taylorbrands.com/SPI. That's TAILORBRANDS.com/SPI. Stop dreaming, start building with Taylor Brands.